Now, with the Netflix, that is a great problem because Netflix, of course, also reflects what's in Harry's autobiography, which has been ghosted for him. I don't know if he's actually read it, but I'm sure that it contains a lot of very damaging material about Charles, William, Kate, and of course, against Camilla, Charles's wife. And so the whole package is now really a time bomb for the royal family and filled with poison. And
30 seconds. That is all it took. A single Instagram story. A letter from Ukraine's Vice President, Yulia Sviridenko. Diplomatic. Warm. The kind of gesture that looks generous on a screen and costs nothing to share. April 2025. A Tuesday morning. Millions of people scrolling through their phones, coffee going cold, the usual noise of the internet doing what the internet does. And then Meghan posts. Except for 2 words sitting at the very top of that letter. Your Royal Highness. She posted it unedited. No caption explaining the diplomatic courtesy. No note saying they got the title wrong. No asterisk. No correction. Just the letter, in full, with those 2 words sitting right there at the top, pushed out to millions of followers on a platform that exists to build her brand.
And I think one of King Charles's greatest challenges is to somehow diffuse that time. And I think he's made various threats to Meghan and Harry, and warned them that if they go ahead, they're going to find themselves ostracized in a way which they can't believe. And so they're worried.
And yet they want their $100 million from Netflix and their reported $50 million from Spotify, and I don't know what he's gotten as the advance for his book. But
And I need you to understand something before we go any further. This was not a slip. This was not an oversight. This was not a busy morning and a careless thumb. This was a contract violation. Documented. Time-stamped. Permanent. Because in January 2020, Meghan Markle signed an agreement. It is still sitting on the official royal website right now. You can read it today. The terms could not have been written more clearly. The Sussexes would not use their Her Royal Highness titles. Not publicly. Not commercially. Not at all. That was the deal negotiated directly with the late Queen Elizabeth at the Sandringham Summit. In exchange, they kept something valuable. They walked away with their dignity intact. They kept the Duke and Duchess titles. They kept Sussex. They kept the brand. All they had to give up was 3 letters. H-L-I-H. That was the price of freedom. And for 5 years, the world watched to see whether they would honor it. Then came April. Then came that Instagram story. Then came Your Royal Highness, sitting unedited on a commercial platform watched by millions, posted by a woman who had agreed, in writing, never to use it again. A source close to Prince William told the Daily Beast exactly what they thought of that moment. The words were plain. Unambiguous. You would have to be an idiot, they said, to believe she did not know exactly what she was doing when she posted that message unedited to her stories. Read that again. Not palace spin. Not anonymous briefing. A direct, on-record assessment of a deliberate act. And it did not stop there. Podcast host Jamie King received a gift basket from Meghan. Addressed using the Her Royal Highness title. Commercial. Direct. Documented. Then Netflix. Mindy Kaling, on camera, on a streaming platform watched by tens of millions of people, called her Meghan Markle. And Meghan corrected her. On camera. For profit. It is so funny, she said, that you keep saying Meghan Markle. You know, I am Sussex now.
What Meghan never really understood, probably not even now, is that when she was cheered as a working royal, it wasn't because she was Meghan Markle, it was because she represented British royalty and all the values of the Queen and all the tradition and 1,000 years of history. So people were cheering not just the person, but also the institution.
Hi viewers, I have to ask you something and I want you to be honest with me in the comments. Do you think Meghan knew exactly what she was doing when she posted that letter, or do you genuinely believe it was an accident? One word is all I need. Knew it. Or accident. Drop it below. Because your answer matters more than you realize to everything I am about to show you. Because here is what a second source told the Daily Beast, and I want you to hear every single word of this. Every time you think they cannot make it worse, they make it worse. The deal with Her Royal Highness was a way to stop them cashing in while letting them walk away with pride and dignity. And now Markle is using Her Royal Highness on a website that seems to exist to sell jam. Sell jam. Let that image settle for a moment. A woman who sat across from the late Queen of England. A woman who negotiated her own exit from the most scrutinized institution on the planet. A woman who told Oprah she had been failed, unsupported, unprotected. That woman is now using a title she legally surrendered to move product on a lifestyle website. And Tom Bower saw all of it. Bower is not new to this story. He wrote Revenge in 2022. 80 sources. Not one successful legal challenge from Meghan's famously aggressive legal team. Not one. And in 2026, he came back. A second book. More sources. More documents. And a trail of evidence that leads somewhere Meghan's publicists cannot spin their way out of, because this time it is not about feelings or feuds or who said what at a family dinner. This time it is about contracts. Legal agreements. Written terms. The kind of thing that ends careers and collapses empires. Because Netflix is gone. Spotify is gone. The publishing deal is gone. And the title that held all of it together is hanging by a thread that King William holds in his hand. But before we get to the money, and those numbers are going to hit harder than anything you have read in a headline, there is something else. Something older. Something that Bower found buried underneath 20 years of carefully constructed storytelling. The origin story. The one she told at the United Nations. The one she told at Vanity Fair. The one she built her entire identity on. The story her own father said was embellished. And that is where everything unravels. She was 11 years old. That is where the story begins. Or at least, that is where Meghan Markle always said it began. A little girl in Los Angeles, watching television, seeing a Procter & Gamble commercial roll across the screen. The words in that ad said women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans. And according to Meghan, something ignited inside her. Something righteous. Something that would not sit still. So she picked up a pen. She wrote to Hillary Clinton. She wrote to senators. She wrote to Procter & Gamble directly. And then, according to the story she has told the world for 2 decades, it worked. The commercial changed. Corporate America blinked. An 11-year-old girl, alone, had taken on one of the most powerful consumer brands on the planet and won. It is a perfect story. Almost too perfect. She told it at the United Nations. She stood at that podium in front of representatives from nearly every nation on Earth, and she told it. She told it at the One Young World Summit. She told it in her Vanity Fair profile, read by millions. She told it again in Colombia in August 2024, decades after it supposedly happened, still as vivid and still as powerful as the first time. This was not a footnote. This was the foundation. The empowered feminist outsider. The girl who stood up to corporate power before she could drive. The woman who had always fought for what was right, even as a child. Every brand deal, every UN ambassadorship, every humanitarian platform she ever stood on was quietly resting on that one story from 1991. And then Tom Bower started asking questions. Bower did not go to palace sources first. He went to the evidence. He went to Procter & Gamble directly. He consulted advertising historians. He traced the paper trail that an 11-year-old activist would have left behind if the story were true. The letters. The replies. the documented change in the commercial.
Well, absolutely, but don't even believe that there were 5 options. What you really saw were Harry and Meghan's fantasy narrative, which they call the truth.
The correspondence from one of the most recognizable political figures in American history. He found silence, not skepticism, not conflicting accounts. Silence. The kind of silence that sits where proof should be and says everything without saying a word. Vanity Fair's own fact-checkers went through the same process. They went to Procter & Gamble directly. They consulted advertising historians. They looked for evidence that Hillary Clinton's office had replied to a letter from an 11-year-old girl in Los Angeles who was angry about a soap commercial. And what they found, after all of that, was the same silence Bauer found. They could not verify the story. They found no evidence that Hillary Clinton ever replied to that letter. No response. No record. No letter confirmed to exist by anyone at Clinton's office or anywhere in the advertising industry. Vanity Fair pulled the story from the article. Let me say that again because it needs to sit with you. One of the most prominent magazines in the world, a publication that has covered Meghan sympathetically and given her significant positive coverage, pulled her own origin story from a profile about her because their fact-checkers could not confirm it happened the way she said it happened. And her own PR team's hired journalists quietly made the same decision. They chose not to include it in the official media bulletin sent to press. Not because it was old news. The statement released to explain the omission was careful and measured. But the reason behind it was not complicated. It had become a liability. Now here is the detail that changes the weight of everything I have just told you. Because what came next did not come from a journalist or a palace source or a rival. It came from Thomas Markle, her own father, the man who was there. In his 2020 documentary, Thomas Markle told the world what he actually remembered about that time. He said he thought Meghan was part of a letter-writing campaign of sorts. A campaign, not a solo act of righteous 11-year-old defiance. A campaign, a collective effort. And then Thomas Markle said something else. Something quieter. Something that landed with the specific weight of a person who is trying to be loyal and truthful at the same time and finding that the two things will not fit together neatly. He said it may have been a little embellished. A class assignment. The story she told at the United Nations. The story she delivered in Colombia in 2024 to a room full of people who admired her for it. The cornerstone of the brand. The proof that she had always been this person, always been this force, always been fighting for something bigger than herself from the very beginning. Her father said it was homework. Think carefully about what that means and what it does not mean. It does not mean Meghan Markle never cared about the things she says she cares about. It does not mean the causes she has championed were insincere. People can grow into their convictions genuinely. People can develop real passions from modest beginnings. But this was not a small exaggeration in a private conversation. This was a story told at the United Nations. This was a story told in Vanity Fair. This was a story deployed on the global stage repeatedly over 2 decades as evidence of who she fundamentally was. The girl who changed things. The child who took on corporate power alone and won. And her father said there was a class involved. Tom Bauer documented all of it. 2 books. 80 sources across both. And in all that time, with Meghan's legal team pursuing anyone who stepped out of line with considerable force, not a single successful legal challenge was mounted against his research. Not one. That is not a coincidence. That is a researcher who understands exactly where the documents are and exactly what they say and exactly how to ensure that what he publishes can withstand every challenge that comes at it. Because here is the thing about a story that cannot be legally challenged. It does not go away. It compounds. Every new audience that hears it adds to the weight of it. Every journalist who cites it, every commentator who references it, every viewer who watches a documentary about it adds another layer to a foundation that was already there before any of them arrived. Bauer built that foundation across 2 books and years of documented research. and the origin story is now part of it. But here is where the story shifts. Because a compromised origin story is damaging. It is the kind of thing that follows a public figure through their career and surfaces every time they try to build something new. But it is not fatal on its own. What makes it fatal is what surrounds it. Because while Meghan was telling the world who she was, 18 people were walking out of her operation. And the people watching them leave were not tabloid journalists. They were palace officials. They were independent investigators. They were experienced professionals who had devoted careers to one of the most demanding institutions on the planet and who found, in the end, that what was being asked of them was something they could not give. And one of them quit in the middle of Africa. Samantha Cohen is the name that changes this from a pattern to a verdict. Cohen did not stumble into royal service. She built a 17-year career inside the British royal family, rising to become one of the most experienced and trusted palace professionals in the institution. When Meghan needed a private secretary in 2018, the most senior advisory role available to her, Cohen was the person chosen. A 6-month transition was planned. Cohen would introduce Meghan to the rhythms of royal life, build the foundations, and then hand over to a permanent replacement. 18 months later, Cohen was still there. Not because she had decided to stay. Because no replacement could be found. Let that register. The British royal household, with access to some of the most qualified professionals in the country, could not find a person willing and able to step into that role. The position sat open. The search continued. And Samantha Cohen kept showing up. When a replacement was finally identified, the decision was made to bring that person along on a royal tour of Africa. The thinking was logical enough. Immerse the replacement in the work. Show them the role in practice. Make the handover as seamless as possible. The replacement quit in Africa. During the tour. Could not last a fortnight on a continent. Could not complete the assignment. Walked away from one of the most prestigious positions available in royal service in the middle of a foreign tour rather than stay in the role. Samantha Cohen confirmed this herself in 2024, speaking to the Herald Sun. And what makes Cohen's account carry the weight it carries is the context in which she was speaking. She was not a disgruntled former employee looking for a sympathetic headline. She was one of 10 staff members formerly interviewed by Buckingham Palace as part of an independently commissioned review. A review privately funded by Queen Elizabeth herself. The late Queen looked at what was being described by the people who worked closest to Meghan and decided it was serious enough to warrant a formal, independent, privately funded investigation. 10 witnesses. An independent investigator. Commissioned by the monarch.
Netflix, oh, we left Netflix, blah, blah, blah. And then it went to, guess what? We're both going down under. Harry's going to do a mental health workshop, and Meghan is going to do a girls' weekend at the Intercontinental in Coogee Beach outside of Sydney, which is hilarious because it's known for sewage runoff.
The findings were never made public. The changes that followed were implemented quietly, without announcement or explanation. But the replacement aide who could not finish a continent said everything that the published findings did not. When the bullying allegations first broke publicly, and they broke with notable timing, the day before the Oprah interview aired, Meghan's response was precise and immediate. She called it a calculated smear campaign based on misleading and harmful misinformation. A smear campaign. That was the framing. That was the word chosen by her team to describe 10 witnesses, an independent investigator, and a review personally commissioned by the Queen of England. Smear campaign. There is a version of the world in which that framing works. There is a version in which a person being genuinely targeted could use exactly those words and be telling the truth. Smear campaigns happen. Powerful institutions have protected themselves by discrediting the people who challenged them throughout all of recorded history. But a smear campaign does not require an independent investigator funded by the person at the top of the institution. A smear campaign does not produce 10 formal witnesses who sit with investigators and give structured accounts. A smear campaign does not result in a replacement aide quitting mid-tour in Africa before the handover is complete. That is not a smear. That is testimony. And underneath the testimony from the palace, there was testimony of a different kind. Quieter. More personal. The kind that takes years to find its words because it comes from people who genuinely cared about the person they are describing. Ninnicky Priddy met Meghan when they were both 2 years old. The Little Red Schoolhouse, Los Angeles. They grew up together in a specific, layered way that childhood friendships do when they last long enough. Sleepovers and road trips. A European holiday at 15. The accumulated weight of 3 decades of shared life, shared history, the kind of closeness that makes a person feel like family because they essentially are. When Meghan married film producer Trevor Engle's son in 2011, she gave Priddy the role that says everything about how much you trust someone. Maid of honor. And then the phone stopped ringing. No conversation. No falling out that either of them could point to and say that was the moment. No final phone call where at least you understand what went wrong. Just the silence of an ending that was decided somewhere Priddy never had access to by someone she thought she knew. Years later, after enough time had passed to understand what had happened and find the language for it, Priddy spoke. She told the Daily Mail and Globe magazine what she had come to understand in the quiet years after the silence began. She said Meghan was calculated. Very calculated in the way she handled people and relationships. She said she was very strategic in the way she cultivated circles of friends. And she said this: once she decides you are not part of her life, she can be very cold. It is this shutdown mechanism she has. Shutdown mechanism. Those 2 words were chosen carefully by someone who had 30 years of evidence for them. This was not anger. This was not betrayal talking. This was a person who had known Meghan Markle since nursery school, who had stood beside her at her first wedding, who had watched the patterns repeat themselves across 3 decades, and who had finally found the precise language for what she had witnessed. Ninnicky Priddy was maid of honor at the first wedding. She was not invited to the second. Then there is Jessica Mulrooney, a Canadian socialite who came into Meghan's life during the years when Meghan needed guidance navigating an unfamiliar world. Mulrooney styled her for royal engagements. She helped her manage the specific pressures of early life in the public eye alongside a member of the British royal family. She flew on royal tours. She was at the baby shower. She was at the royal wedding. Multiple sources described her as Meghan's most trusted confidant. 9 years. The kind of sustained closeness that goes beyond professional loyalty into something that looks and feels like genuine friendship. June 2020. The BLM movement. Mulrooney became involved in a public dispute with a black influencer. The details of that dispute were specific to Mulrooney and had nothing directly to do with Meghan. But the timing created an opportunity. And a source told Page 6 something that stopped people in the middle of reading it. The controversy, they said, really gave Meghan the excuse she was waiting for to cut Jess off for good. The excuse she was waiting for. Not a reaction to something that had happened. Not a difficult but necessary response to a painful situation. An excuse. Something that had been waited for. A justification that, when it finally arrived, was used cleanly and without hesitation. 9 years. Gone. And then there is Piers Morgan, which tells a shorter story but one with its own particular clarity. In 2016, Meghan followed him on social media. They exchanged messages. They met for a drink in London and by Morgan's own account, they got on brilliantly. That same evening, she attended a party. At that party, she met Harry. The next night, Harry and Meghan had dinner together, just the 2 of them. Morgan later described what followed on Irish television in the plainest possible terms. That was the last he ever heard from Meghan Markle. One drink. One more useful connection made the same night. Gone. There is now a word in the Urban Dictionary specifically for this pattern. The word is markled. It means to be abandoned completely by someone after you have played a meaningful role in their life. The existence of a dictionary entry built around a specific person's behavior, recognizable enough that it needed its own word, tells you something that individual stories alone cannot. It tells you the pattern is that consistent. 18 staff departures across 6 years. 10 formal witnesses in a palace-funded bullying review. A replacement aide who quit mid-tour in Africa. A childhood best friend who named a shutdown mechanism after 30 years of watching it operate. A 9-year friendship ended without a phone call. A media personality dropped the same night a more valuable connection appeared. Each of those things, taken alone, is a story. Taken together, they are a verdict. And the verdict only remained manageable as long as the money kept coming. As long as Netflix was writing checks. As long as Spotify had a contract in play. As long as Penguin Random House had a publishing deal on the table and the Sussex name was still worth something in rooms that matter. And then March 2026 arrived. And everything changed at once. $100 million. Hold that number in your mind. $100 million was what Netflix reportedly paid to bring Harry and Meghan's production company, Archewell, into their ecosystem. That was the figure that made Hollywood pay attention. That was the number that said the Sussex brand was not just a cultural conversation. It was a commercial reality. A viable, investable, serious enterprise built on a name that opened doors at the highest levels of the entertainment industry. The deal was built on a single premise. The royal identity. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex bringing the monarchy to a global streaming audience. That was what Netflix bought. Not scripts. Not production expertise. Not a track record of content that performed. They bought the name. The title. The identity. The 2 words that sat at the top of a 2020 agreement that was supposed to protect exactly that kind of commercial exploitation. And in March 2026, Netflix terminated the deal. Industry insiders described the mood inside Netflix in exactly 4 words. We are done with them. Not a creative difference that 2 parties could not resolve. Not a mutual decision reached after careful and respectful negotiation. Done. Past tense. Absolute. The kind of ending that does not leave a door open for future conversations. Before Netflix, there was Spotify. A multi-million-dollar podcast contract spanning multiple years. A deal that came with resources, with platform, with the kind of access that most content creators spend careers trying to earn. And in the entire run of that contract, 1 season of content was delivered. 1. Out of a multi-year agreement. 1 season. Spotify executive Bill Simmons did not mark the end of that relationship with diplomatic language. He went on record and called them frauds. Not a disappointment. Not a creative mismatch that both parties had learned from. Frauds. That is a specific word. It carries a specific meaning. It implies a gap between what was promised and what was delivered so significant that the ordinary vocabulary of professional disappointment does not cover it. Simmons knew what he was saying. He said it anyway. Then April 2026. Penguin Random House. The publisher that turned Harry's memoir Spare into a global bestseller, the company that had positioned itself as the home of the Sussex story, allowed a reported $20 million book deal to quietly expire without renewal. Sources described both sides as having burned the bridge. And they were specific, notably specific, about the nature of the damage. The publisher felt financially burned. Do the mathematics with me. $100 million from Netflix. A multi-million Spotify contract. $20 million from Penguin Random House. All of it gone. In sequence. In under 18 months. 3 of the most significant commercial relationships the Sussex operation had built, dismantled one after the other like a row of structures that could not hold their own weight once the first one fell. That is not misfortune. That is not a difficult period in a longer career. That is an industry delivering a verdict in the language that industries use. Money. But the dimension that makes this more than a business story, the dimension that connects the Netflix termination to the Instagram post to the Palace review to the 18 departures, is the one that sits underneath all of it. Every single deal that collapsed was built on the same commercial foundation. The Sussex name, the Duchess title, the royal identity that the 2020 Sandringham Agreement was specifically designed to prevent from being used commercially. Royal expert Kinsey Schofield put it plainly. Harry and Meghan are not supposed to use their titles for profit, but they obviously do. Privacy expert Trevor Cook went further, raising the possibility that the royal family could pursue legal action over the commercial use of a title that Meghan had signed an agreement not to use commercially. And that is not speculation. That is a contractual reality with a name that matters. Material misrepresentation. Every contract signed under the name Duchess of Sussex by a woman who may no longer legally hold that title when William becomes king faces a retroactive question that no rebrand and no press statement can answer. The Sandringham Agreement is documented. The Instagram post is documented. The Netflix correction to Mindy Kaling is on camera, on a commercial platform, in permanent record. Strip the title officially, legally, by letters patent, and every business constructed on top of it faces that same question at the same time. A source close to Prince William confirmed to the Daily Beast that a way will be found. Not if. When. That is a specific distinction. If implies uncertainty. When implies a decision already made, waiting only for the moment of execution. And when that moment comes, here is what separates Meghan from everyone else in that family. Here is the detail that her supporters have never honestly reckoned with. Harry was born a prince. Strip every title William could possibly remove and Harry remains the son of a king, the grandson of a queen, a man whose name is written permanently into the documented history of a nation. His identity has a flaw. Something solid and unreachable underneath everything else, something that no decree and no legal instrument can dissolve because it was never granted by any of them. It was given at birth. It is constitutionally and historically his. Meghan was born Meghan Rachel Markle in Los Angeles, California. Her father was a lighting director. Her mother was a yoga instructor. The title Duchess of Sussex was extended to her through marriage, by royal prerogative, because she married into the right family at the right moment. It was never hers by birth. It was never hers by right. It was given, under specific written conditions, with specific written terms, and with a specific written agreement about what she could and could not do with it. If it is removed by royal decree, she does not become a reduced version of what she was. She becomes Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. No Duchess. No Sussex. No Her Real Highness. No title. No brand. No commercial identity built across 5 years of carefully constructed positioning. Just a name. A name that does not open the door at Netflix. A name that does not carry a publishing advance. A name that does not sell the jam being quietly branded under a title she legally surrendered in a room with the late Queen of England in January 2020. Every crisis Meghan has navigated before this one had a route out. The Oprah interview, she controlled the edit, the framing, the message, the timing. The bullying allegations, she called them a smear campaign and waited for the news cycle to move. The Netflix collapse, she rebranded. American Riviera Orchard became as ever. Archewell kept a public face. The Duchess name kept enough doors open to maintain the appearance of momentum. A press statement here. A strategic interview there. A carefully worded Instagram caption that gives just enough to satisfy and just little enough to avoid accountability. She cannot do any of that to a letters patent. She cannot call a parliamentary act a smear campaign. She cannot rebrand a royal decree. She cannot control the edit on a formal legal instrument issued under the authority of a king. The institution she spent 5 years publicly dismantling in interviews and documentaries and globally broadcast conversations has exactly one move left. And it is the one move that exists entirely outside the reach of her communications team. Official. Legal. Permanent. Silent. Ninicky Priddy called it the shutdown mechanism. The cold decision. The closed door that arrives without warning and without explanation and against which there is no appeal. She used those words to describe what Meghan does to people who have outlived their usefulness in her life. People who gave years, gave loyalty, gave trust, and found themselves on the other side of a door that simply closed. It turns out institutions have those too. And when William becomes king, when the letters patent is issued and the formal removal is made official and permanent, the shutdown mechanism will have been used by someone with considerably more authority than any of them. The door will close. Clean. Final. No negotiation. No press opportunity. No documentary that reframes the moment. Just official, legal, permanent silence where the word Duchess used to be. So here is where everything lands after all of it. 2 books from Tom Bower. 80 sources. 0 successful legal challenges. The origin story that could not survive a fact check at Vanity Fair and that her own father described as embellished. 18 staff departures across 6 years, including a replacement aide who could not last a fortnight in Africa. A childhood best friend of 30 years who named the pattern with the phrase shutdown mechanism. A 9-year friendship ended without a phone call. 100 million from Netflix, gone. A Spotify executive who used the word fraud on record. 20 million from Penguin Random House, expired. The Instagram post with Your Royal Highness sitting unedited at the top. The Netflix correction to Mindy Kaling, on camera, for profit. All of it documented. All of it time-stamped. All of it permanent. And underneath all of it, the question that Tom Bower has been building toward across 2 books and hundreds of documented pages and 80 sources who agreed to speak. If the very first story she ever told about herself publicly, the story she took to the United Nations, the story her own father said was a class assignment that was embellished over 20 years, if that story could not survive a fact check, what else in that biography has never been properly verified? What other stories have been quietly built into the foundations of a global brand? That question does not have a press statement that answers it. That question does not have a rebrand that makes it go away. It compounds. It gathers weight with every new piece of documentation that joins it. And Tom Bower is not done. In the next video, I am going to show you something specific. Something documented. A conversation that took place between palace officials before the Oprah interview was ever filmed. A conversation that changes what we think we know about who was aware of what and when they became aware of it. A conversation that, when you hear it in full, makes everything that came after it look not like a series of unfortunate escalations but like a sequence that was always going to arrive at exactly this point. It is the piece of this story that has not been fully reported anywhere. Do not miss it.